Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. This is the last and the final episode on the issue of Itmam al-Hujjah, or the conclusive communication of the truth. Previously, we have seen the statement of this law, the way it has been explicitly mentioned at several instances in the Quran. We have also seen the mechanism of this law. And in the third instance, we have seen the history of the law and how it was implemented in the various periods of the prophetic era. Today, in the fourth instance, we will look at the consequences of this law and how it actually affects the directives which are found in the Quran and Hadith. Ustaz has said that there are three directives of the Quran and there are three directives of Hadith that have been misinterpreted because this law has not been properly given its due the way these three instances in each of these two sources have been cited. So in the case of the Quran, jihad against non-Muslims is the first source or the first instance in which the Quran has not been properly understood. The second one is prohibition of friendship with non-Muslims is also something that has not been rightly understood. And thirdly, the question of prohibition of asking forgiveness for non-Muslims. This has also been wrongly understood. All these three have been mentioned in the Quran. They have a very specific connotation, but they have been generalized. In the case of Hadith also, there are three issues that have been wrongly understood. Firstly is the issue of apostasy, or a person who relinquishes faith, and it is said that he should be put to death. Again, Ustaz has shown that this is a very specific instance and it is not to be generalized. Killing of non-Muslims also is not something that has been allowed, in the sense that in lieu of qisas, that when a person kills a non-Muslim, it is said that a Muslim will not be killed in his place. And thirdly, prohibition of inheritance between Muslims and non-Muslims. This also has been mentioned in Hadith literature. For example, people of interfaith, people who are Muslims and non-Muslims, they will not mutually inherit. So 3 from the Quran and 3 from Hadith literature, they have been erroneously understood. And of course, the nature of these issues is such that if they are misunderstood, then of course, the whole misunderstanding, this misconception can really play havoc with the directives of religion. So Ustaz have tried to explain all these 6 directives in their proper perspective, and I will try to summarize what he has said. First, we will look at the jihad concept against the non-Muslims. So it has been understood by authorities that Muslims must fight the polytheist nations as well as the Jews and Christians of today until they subdue them. And it is further held that while the polytheist nations must be put to death if they do not accept faith, the Jews and the Christians can be allowed to live on their own religions if they submit to Muslim authority by paying jizya. So the famous Quranic verses that we have already discussed in our previous sessions, one of them is verse 5 of Surah number 9, and the words are, I'm just going to read the translation. So when the forbidden ones are over, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Slay the idolaters wherever you find them, seize them, surround them, and everywhere lie in ambush for them. But if they repent from their wrong beliefs and are diligent in their prayer and pay zakat and spare their lives, God is oft forgiving and ever merciful. So this is something that is cited as far as idolaters and polytheists are concerned. The second verse also says something that has been cited against in reference to the fact that non-Muslims or who are Jews and Christians, how they must be dealt. And again, the translation of verse 29 of Surah number 9 says, fight those who believe not in Allah or the last day, nor hold that forbidden which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya after being subdued and live a life of submission. So we have already seen, while discussing the law of Itmam al-Hujjah, that these verses do not have a general application. They relate to the polytheists and the Jews and the Christians of the era of Prophet Muhammad. Upon them was the truth communicated conclusively. For the Jews and the Christians, they were allowed to live because they were primarily monotheists, and they were allowed to live on their own religion if they paid jizya. But this option was not given to polytheists. It was not given to the polytheists, and because they committed shirk or polytheism willfully, so they were to be put to death. However, after the departure of Prophet Muhammad, who was the last of the prophets, this is something that is no longer applicable. Today, jihad can only be conducted against oppression and injustice and persecution, which is elsewhere mentioned in the Quran. So nowhere does the Quran say that jihad is something that has to be conducted against these people, these denominations for the spread of Islam, or in the fact that various territories be conquered. The only legitimate way today for jihad is if people are under persecution, or if they are, of course, suffering from injustice and oppression, then this can be done. And that too, when people who do fight have the capability that they can at least win the war. The second of these directives is prohibition of friendship with non-Muslims. This has also been mentioned in the Quran at several instances. Now, for example, for the idolaters, it is the first verse of Surah number 16, which is Surah Mumtahina, which is cited by Ustaz. I'm just going to read the translation once again. The words are, "Believers, do not befriend those who are enemies of mine and yours. You extend ties of love and friendship to them, whereas they have denied the truth that has been revealed to you. They drive out the messenger and yourselves because you professed faith in God, your Lord. If you set off to fight for my cause, concealing your ties of friendship with them, even though I know what you conceal and what you reveal, and whoever of you do this have strayed from the right path." So if you look at the context of this verse, it relates to the idolaters. And for the people of the book, we have Surah 5, which is Surah Ma'idah, verse 51. It says, "Believers, take not the Jews and the Christians for your friends. They are but friends to each other. And he who amongst you turns to them for friendship is of them." Once again, if you look at the context of these verses, you will find out that these verses, they relate to those people, to the polytheists and the Jews and the Christians of the era of Prophet Muhammad, who had intentionally denied the truth. And as a punishment, they were told that, or Muslims were told that they should not make these people their friends because they are enemies of God. They have nothing to do with the Jews and the Christians of today. Because as we have discussed this, that the truth has not been communicated to them in its conclusive form, because this can only be done by messengers of God, who of course no longer exist. So today, this is not the right thing to do, that we don't make friends with the Jews and the Christians. And the Jews and the Christians of today have to be treated as non-Muslims, and as non-Muslims, they should be made friends with, according to our own customs and traditions and convenience. And this is one of the best ways to actually deliver them the message of religion. The third directive is regarding prohibition of asking for friendship for non-Muslims. This is also a very common misperception, that the Quran has stopped us from seeking forgiveness for non-Muslims. And the verse cited is this verse that you are seeing before you. This is verse 113 of Surah number 9, Surah Tawbah. It says, "It is not proper for the Prophet and those who believe to ask Allah's forgiveness for the mushrikun, even though they be of kin, after it has become to them that they are dwellers of the fire." Once again, viewers, if you look at the text of this Quranic verse, you'll find that it actually refers to the mushrikun, or the polytheists of the times of the Prophet. About them, we can say that, as the verse says, it had become clear, مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُمْ أَصْحَابُ الْجَحِيمِ, that the Almighty had pronounced His verdict about them, that they no longer deserve for any form of salvation. They'll be doomed in the hereafter, and hence the Prophet and the believers must not ask for their forgiveness. This is not a general directive. Today, if non-Muslims pass away, we can always make a supplication for their forgiveness, because God is going to forgive them on His own principle. So it is just a recommendation from us that, God, if they deserve any lenience, then please grant them this lenience. And hence, forgiveness prayer for any non-Muslim today can be made. Now we come to the three directives which are mentioned in Hadith. First of all is the directive of apostasy, which means that people who give up faith, who give up Islam, it is normally believed that they shall be put to death. They don't have the option to leave faith. And the narrative which is cited in this regard is something which has become very famous. It is said, "Man baddala deenahu faqtuluhu," which means that the Prophet said that execute the person who changes his faith. Execute the person. Now, they think that, again, this is the ruling, which is a general ruling, and it relates to every non-Muslim who becomes every Muslim who becomes an apostate. Again, this is something that has been misunderstood. It relates, the annas is something that relates to the mushrikun of the times of the Prophet. And about them, it was said that for them is the death penalty if they don't accept. Now, apostasy is something that was meant for them, that if these people, after becoming Muslims, if they become non-Muslims once again, they go back to their polytheism or idolatry once again, then originally, because for the polytheists, the death punishment was something that was warranted, but what made them secure from this punishment was that they had become Muslims. So for any person who now reverts back to his original state of polytheism, about them, this hadith pronounces this verdict that he should be put to death. Again, clearly telling us that this is a narrative that relates to the polytheists of the times of Prophet Muhammad. Any person out of who does not belong to this era is not to be given this punishment. Now, as far as the second narrative is concerned, which is mentioned in hadith literature, it relates to the killing of non-Muslims. Now, there is a hadith which is presented in support of the view that a Muslim will not be killed if he is guilty of killing a non-Muslim in the case of qisas, but the reverse will be carried out. So the words are, La yuqtalu mu'minun bi kafirin, which means that no believer will be killed in the qisas of a disbeliever. Now, once again, if you look at some of the variants of this hadith, you'll find that it is mentioned as La yuqtalu muslimun bi mushrikin. No Muslim will be killed in qisas of an idolater. Now, once again, it is essential to relate a hadith to its foundation in Quran. It just cannot be taken independently. So just as in the previous case, which is the case of apostasy, the basis of killing a non-Muslim is the same that we cited earlier on regarding jihad, that if a polytheist is someone who has been administered or who has become guilty of the death punishment, if he is someone who reverts back to his original state, then he will be killed. In this manner also, we know that it relates to the mushriks or the idolaters of the time of the Prophet. So this is solely related to the idolaters of the Prophet's times. This directive has no bearing on the non-Muslims of today. And today, if a Muslim is guilty of murdering a non-Muslim, if he is guilty of murdering a non-Muslim, he shall certainly be sent to the gallows, and he will be, of course, killed, unless, of course, he's forgiven by the family of the slain, and the state and the government also endorses this forgiveness. The third and last directive which is mentioned in this regard is the prohibition of inheritance between Muslims and non-Muslims. So according to the hadith, there is a hadith which says that Muslims and non-Muslims cannot mutually inherit from one another. And the words are, a Muslim cannot be an heir to a disbeliever, nor can a disbeliever a Muslim's heir. So today, of course, we see that there are numerous conversions taking place all over the world. It has become a very important issue. And if this hadith is understood in the light of the divine practice discussed in the foregoing pages, one can see that the article Alif Lam is appended to the word Al-Kafir, which is, of course, something that such a disbeliever is someone who is not in any case going to inherit. And also we know from the Quran that as far as the case of inheritance is concerned, it is the basis of kinship or the benefit of kinship which is mentioned. In other words, people become heirs to a deceased person if they have a certain amount of benefit. Now, if someone is after the life of the person, then the benefit that a person could have had for that deceased person, of course, can never be there because he's after the life of that person. Hence, because of the fact that regarding the Quraysh and the people of the book, this benefit of kinship no longer existed between them and the Muslims in those times, because now they had deliberately denied the truth. So this benefit, which is the real reason for a person inheriting the estate of a person, becomes zero in the case of people who have deliberately denied the truth. And this benefit no longer exists. So therefore, in that case, they cannot mutually inherit. In other words, in this case, it would be forbidden. Again, this is a case of the times of the Prophet, and this directive is only related to the direct addressees of Prophet Muhammad and has no bearing on later non-Muslims. So viewers, these are the 6 directives about which Ustaz has said that they have been erroneously misunderstood, they have been extended and given a general ambit of application, whereas all these 6 directives belong specifically to the era of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.